Thank you so much. So I'm sure people will keep joining, but we don't want to keep everybody waiting. Thank you for this time, Tracy. Thank you for joining us and sharing your knowledge on boundaries of coaching. As everybody knows, Tracy is a veteran in coaching industry and has been supporting the Coaching Federation, been serving different organizations and coaches from so many years and needs a little introduction. However, I really look up to Tracy for the knowledge and the experience she brings to the table. And we have worked on the ICF boards together. Have really experienced her working style and thinking, and it really inspires me. So thank you, Tracy, for being an inspiration in this industry. And welcome.
Thank you so much, Jaya. And I have to say, for everyone also here, that feeling is absolutely reciprocated. Jaya, I think we first met when Jaya won the Young Leaders Award, if I recall, at a wonderful award centre. So Jaya is also a very key figure in our field in terms of young, inspiring leaders in the coaching profession, which is exactly what we need now to take coaching where it needs to go next. So the feeling is absolutely reciprocated, Jaya, and it's a real pleasure to be here with all of you. And I was really intrigued, I must say. I've done so many different sessions and had the privilege to do so many different sessions around the world on different aspects of coaching. And I've never been asked to do a session on boundaries in coaching. So when Jaya said to me, let's have a session on boundaries in coaching, I thought, oh, okay. And it really got my head thinking. So I've come today with a few thoughts and ideas, and my hope is actually that we can have some kind of a dialogue going together, so that it's not just me talking at you all of the time. That would be perhaps rather boring. So please feel free as we're going along to pop any questions into the chat, any observations into the chat, or even better, just speak, so that we can actually have a bit of a dialogue going. I have got a pack of slides that I have prepared that give some thoughts and ideas, but it's certainly not the whole picture, because I actually found while I was designing and preparing for this, I thought, my gosh, I'm still only scratching the surface. I've come up with, I think, quite a few different areas of boundaries in coaching, and yet I am not presenting this as the whole answer today. I think there will be more, and I really want to have today's conversation perhaps as a catalyst for you to continue to think about where else are these boundaries. So I'm imagining that we won't finish everything today in the hour that we have together. We will start something that hopefully you will carry on and keep exploring, because it's such an open space. However, even if we don't get through all of the ideas I've got on my slides for you, we will be sending you a pack of the slides out afterwards, just for some more food for thought. So hopefully that approach is okay with you. And as I say, please do feel free to engage with me as much as you would like to, either by chat or by speaking. I'd love to connect with you about this and have a conversation. But to kick us off, why don't I share some initial thoughts? Let me just share my screen. Let's just pop that onto slideshow. Okay, so we're talking about boundaries here. I'm not going to really speak about this slide because Jaya's already given me a wonderful introduction, and I'd rather talk about coaching boundaries than about me. So let's go straight into this piece. When I started to think about this, my mind immediately, I did a little bit of a mind map and a brainstorm, and I thought, okay, where are the areas within coaching where boundaries are relevant? And as I said before, literally, my head started to go into a flat spin, because I thought, gosh, there are so many interesting angles to this and areas of this. And I ultimately, as I was starting to cluster some of my thoughts, I started to capture them around these 8 areas of ethics, responsibilities, time, our role, personal issues, relationship considerations, contracting, and the work and our work. And there are some crossovers because it's a very interwoven space. And so we may find that some of our thoughts that are relevant for ethics might also be relevant for contracting. So it's not a topic that we can look at, I don't think, in isolation, but it's really fascinating where some of these things came up. And as I said before, one of the things that the ICF, for example, really supports us and encourages us to do is a practice called reflective practice. And if you're familiar with competency 2 in the current ICF core competency model, you will see how this idea of reflective practice is advocated as not just beneficial, but actually a requirement and an expectation of us for our ongoing development. And I think that we could do a reflective practice exercise on all 8 of these areas. And I'm just offering that up as a voluntary assignment, if you want to take that away at some point, to just sit down and think, what are all of the boundaries associated with some of these bubbles? And I'm sure you may find even more. But let's make a start and see how we get on. I'm going to start with the ethics one, just because it's logically there up at the top. But if any of you, as we go through, knowing that we may not have a time to go through all of them in complete depth, if you want to go to another one next, I'll happily jump around and we can see as much as we can get of this as possible. So here are my initial thoughts on ethics. And of course, ethics is just an enormous area for boundaries. And if anything, for me, the code of ethics, the ICF code of ethics, is almost like a backbone of boundaries. It's highlighting many, many different aspects of the kinds of practice and conduct that we are guided towards or we are invited to stay away from. And so boundaries, in a way, I think of ethics as almost like the rail tracks or the buffer tracks to help us navigate our practice effectively. And I can see Akansha has also put into the chat, if any of you want to have a look at it, she's put a link to the ICF core competencies, and we'll also be dipping in and out of some aspects of the code of ethics as well today. So you don't have to look at those, but just to help you navigate, if you want to look at those, then you might find that useful. So here I literally just captured a few immediate points around some of the very important boundaries that are included within our code of ethics. And of course, there are many aspects of confidentiality that are highlighted, how information is exchanged, and boundaries around what can and can't be shared. And then, of course, we have a really important space that I know is very close to Jaya and my heart, because we worked together on a task force with the ICF around this whole area of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And just looking at those words there alone, without delving into the code of ethics more, there are so many boundaries that we could be thinking about. So I'm just going to come off of the screen share there, because I'd love to engage with you, and then I'll share a few other thoughts that I had. But what's coming up for any of you as you start to think about boundaries and the code of ethics and some of those things that I just put on the screen there? What's coming to your mind around what could be boundaries for our consideration as coaches that we may need to navigate? Anything popping into your minds? It's coming up for you. Please feel free to pop into the chat or speak out if you want to.
Can I speak something, Tracy?
Yeah, please go ahead, Jaya. Yeah.
So when I was thinking about this topic and I requested you to present, I was the thoughts around emotional boundaries and boundaries around thinking was on my mind, and I thought that that's not been explored much, and I think it's hard to explore it on paper about what are your thinking boundaries and what are your emotional boundaries, and what are some of your I would say professional boundaries as to what to do and what not to do, how far to go in your coaching relationship, were some of the thoughts that came to my mind, and I'm just wondering, and this is open to everybody for discussion as to what do you think about it? What are some of the things that we need to practice to take care of ourselves as coaches?
Yes, I love that idea, Jaya, and that took me immediately back to competency 2 around staying fit for practice and being mentally and emotionally prepared. And also on the point of emotions, competency 5 maintains presence, talks about self-regulating our emotions, doesn't it? And also being able to work with strong client emotions. So what are your thoughts, any of you, about how we do that, and what are some of the boundaries that we have to be careful of or to navigate?
Yeah, it'll be nice to
When
have
I
it.
heard, yeah, when I was hearing you and Jaya Tracy, continuing or adding on to what Jaya was mentioning, the one thing that came to my mind was, care. As a coach, we all definitely care for the progress, for the well-being, for the goals that needs to be achieved for a client. So how much do we care, and how much is good enough to care? Because this, in my experience, I feel it's like, you do care, but there are moments that you would little slip away when the care goes a little too much. um, so I would like to probably hear some thoughts around that. These are some things that came to my mind as I was listening to you.
That's lovely, Sudha, and thank you. This space then of, on the one hand, we are invited to have a high level of care in that we are seeking to create a close, intimate relationship with our clients that has empathy and support and concern on the one hand. And then on the other hand, what if we care too much? Could we care too much? And how would we know? Any thoughts on that? How do you know that you're staying within that boundary of appropriate levels of care? Any thoughts on that?
I think one indicator for me has always been, if the client is taking too much of my mind space, even post the session, in terms of, caring. Yeah, it's good. We do reflect. We reflect on the whole session, on, what went on well, what did I miss, what I could have done differently, or where am I getting stuck as a coach, and things like that. But I think beyond the, what do I say, the reflection that is required for you as a coach, if the client is taking too much of your mind space beyond the session, I feel that's one of the indicators for you to know if you're getting too much or if you're just crossing the boundary.
Yeah, that's a great measure point, isn't it, for us, a benchmark. We know that we have to have a deep level of connection. However, we also need to know to put it down, don't we, and move on. And of course, holding and carrying on those thoughts could be something then that is meaning that our care is more than is perhaps helpful. And that's perhaps where, for any of you who engage in something like coaching supervision, is a great space to think about, am I holding on to those feelings too much? And I can remember a personal experience of that, actually. Before I started coaching many, many years ago, I used to work as an addiction therapist with drug and alcohol addicts. And I had to stop that work when I was much, much younger, because I started to care too much, and I couldn't stop thinking about and worrying about, more importantly, the people who I was working with and their families. And I ended up stopping that work until I had learned to find my boundary of stepping away from those feelings. So it's really, really important, isn't it? Let's hear a few more thoughts. So I think I saw Swasti, your hand go up, and also Sunanda. So let's go to Swasti first and then Sunanda.
I think what's showing up for me at the moment is really around care for myself as a coach and doing the inner work that's required to be done to be able to just maintain those boundaries and to have clarity in that moment where I fear stepping over that boundary. So importance of inner work. And that for me kind of covers or tick marks a lot of boxes around, am I able to regulate my emotions? Am I, is the client really stepping over into my personal space or mental or emotional space at any given point in time? Yeah. But the challenge that I see is, and I kind of resonate with what Tracy mentioned around her work previously, is I'm also a mindfulness instructor, like a trauma-based mindfulness instructor. So I think the being of me as a coach really, it's not very separate or distinct in either of the roles. And yet the more I work, the more I realize that there needs to be that distinction really clear in our own self. And so, yeah, to have that clear distinctions is going to be kind of my job rather than, so just like you, I actually stepped away from the mindfulness work for a while to be able to establish myself as a coach, also as a coach, and then kind of get the two together.
Thank you, Swasti. So there's two really key things staying with me from what you just shared. One is how I really need to learn and know more about myself, don't I? I need to know where my tolerances are. I need to know where my own boundaries are, my own needs. And this idea of self-care. And this is one of the reasons I love Competency 2, actually, because it really does invite us to think about us as the instrument of our work, and how are we learning more about ourselves so that we know how to navigate these boundaries. And that idea of self-care that you mentioned there, Swati, resonates with me on something that Sarah has put in the chat here, that she says, I often thought we were setting boundaries for the coachees, but soon realized that my boundaries are equally important, So absolutely. And thank you, Sarah, for popping that in, that it is not only about the client, is it? Even though our work is so client-centered and we are in service of our client, we are ultimately in an intimate partnership. And so we really must consider those as well. That's wonderful. Thank you. I'll pick up on a couple of other comments in the chat in a moment, but I wanted to come to Sunanda as well, because you had your hand up before.
Yes,
what would you like to bring in?
Yeah, so it's just kind of, everything that's been said so far resonates with me. I think what stands out for me is that as a reflective process is to, more often than not, we end up reflecting on what we did right and, what we could have done differently. I think maybe a bit more reflection on what the process has done to us in terms of what's been triggered within us. And also attachment to what the client's topic. I do executive coaching, and a couple of things that really I find my triggers are, when women are in leadership position and they do not get to air their voice, they're not heard. I find that I tend to be overly empathetic, as well as maybe, kind of try and slip into advisory mode. So that's something that I'm mindful about. And it's that, some stuff that, experiences that we have been through and what the client goes through, getting too attached to it.
Thank you, Sunanda. So, wow, another very exciting area. And what you've just shared, Sunanda, is linked, I think, also to something that Bernard put in the chat when he was talking about boundaries between learning channels such as mentoring and facilitation and our roles and how directive or non-directive we are. And of course, as Sunanda's highlighting, we could slip into being a bit more directive or suggestive or mentoring if our empathy is triggered even more around a sense of resonance with the topic. If often they say, don't they, that our clients bring our own work to the table. Yeah, so there's often in our client's story something that is also an opportunity for us to learn, isn't it? And it could resonate quite deeply with us, or perhaps we've had a very similar experience. Or as Sunanda is highlighting, we may have our own beliefs and views and biases about certain topics that could very easily come in, couldn't they? And may mean that we are more attached to an outcome or to a particular stance. So we're having to really regulate that, aren't we? And I think this links maybe to something that Sudha has also put in here, where she's saying she'd like to hear more about what boundaries we're talking about with regards to diversity, inclusion, equity and justice. So, Sunanda's highlighted one there around women in the workplace, etc. What are some of the other boundaries in that kind of space that are important for us to be aware of and to navigate in today's world? Any other thoughts on that from anyone? What are the boundaries that are important when it comes to things like diversity, inclusion, equity, all of those kinds of things?
I guess our internal biases that could be, and these are really unconscious biases that we might not even know that we are displaying those in conversations.
Yeah, and our biases may not always be known to us, huh? We've got conscious bias and we also have unconscious bias. So there are things that we have blind spots, don't we? Just like everyone else, we could also have blind spots. So what is our role then in terms of, as coaches, what do you feel is our role to help us to navigate this space around diversity, inclusion, etc., as effectively as we could do, knowing that we don't know everything? What could we do?
I think here we would need to think contra, because when we think of boundaries, we think about adhering to boundaries, keeping the boundaries. When it comes to many of such things such as diversity and a lot of concepts that we are also in a learning mode on, that in that space we should think about extending our boundaries. So boundaries are not only restrictive, boundaries are also expansive. So we need to think of boundaries in both contexts. Where do we need to bring them closer and where do we need to expand?
Wow, so this is lovely, isn't it? So Neha's bringing in this really wonderful concept here. Thank you, Neha, that a boundary is not a fixed line, is it? It could be something that we have to tighten and bring closer for protection or safety or meeting our own needs. But also we do have to flex and expand, don't we? And in many cases, we see in the Code of Ethics and the ICF core competencies that we are invited to understand the client's context, to be inclusive. So these boundaries are something that we are having to be fluid around, aren't they? Any other thoughts on that, around the fluidity versus the rigidity of boundaries. Lovely thought, Neha. Thank you.
So I
What does
think
that bring up?
pandemic actually pushed us to flex our boundaries, right? Make some exceptions to what we usually practice, and also create more new boundaries to be able to manage our own well-being. So I think pandemic has really created those. For example, if I know that my client has canceled on my appointment twice or thrice, I know there are genuine reasons going on, especially during pandemic. And then when I get to know from them, the cases were huge. So that's a typical example of how a boundary is flexed. And there are times when a client is actually normal circumstances going through something that they can't share, needed us to flex the boundaries around, hey, this is how my practice works, but right now I'm making an exception because I know the situation is not normal.
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic, terrible though it was and still is in some areas, has taught us many things, hasn't it? It has challenged many of the boundaries and the paradigms that we have previously worked with, and has shown us not only how we need to flex those boundaries, but actually how we can. It's interesting, isn't it, how so many people through necessity have had to access that fluidity, that flexibility, and that innovation in reinventing ways of working, boundaries around ways of working. There's another boundary that someone's brought in that I'd love to just go back to. I'm trying to make sure I don't miss too many. And I know Tim's has popped in a couple of useful resources into the chat as well. So thank you, Tim, for that. I was just coming back to something that Rajesh put in earlier, which was the oft debated one, is the coaching and therapy boundary. Are the lines getting a bit blurred? So let's have a little think about that. Thank you, Rajesh, for popping that in. What do you think? Where are we at the moment in the world with this discipline of coaching and the discipline of counselling or therapy? What are you noticing, any of you?
Hi, it's Sarah. Hi. I've noticed, particularly since the pandemic, that certainly in with my coaches, that coaching seems to have sort of become a lot less what I would define as maybe transactional, and perhaps even a bit deeper. And that's quite interesting. And I've also noticed that a couple of coaches that I've worked with in my cohort when I qualified have become psychotherapists as well. And I'm sure that's off the back of, what they've been experiencing over the last few years. So I think it's a really interesting one. I hear two schools of thought on it, and oftentimes people saying coaches shouldn't even talk about mental health. It's not they're not qualified to. But I think, when you walk into a room, you bring everything with you. You bring where you're at that moment in time, you bring your work colleagues, your family, your, the permacrisis, you bring it all with you. So I think it's really important to be open to that noticing and respecting the client and being present with them, however they show up to the session. But I guess from my perspective is I had it last week actually, where someone was very visibly upset, and I just felt, I just asked them, I asked them directly, how are they, how is their mental health, what's their view of that? And she actually expressed that she couldn't stop crying, she was finding it hard, and that's where I was able to say, well, recognize and empathize with her and say, oh, I'm really sorry you're feeling like that, but talk about getting additional support. So I think it's really important to be direct and read the moment and be courageous.
Yes, I'm holding from what you've shared there, Sarah, a real balance between being courageous and being safe. You know, there are some aspects within a mental health arena where, unless we are trained as therapists, we can't go to, because we would not be supportive anymore. But equally, with the amount of, let's say, well-being challenges that are coming into coaching and into the workplace particularly, there is still perhaps enormous value that coaches can offer to support people in navigating how they want to start looking after their mental health, even if we're not working with them in a therapeutic setting to do so. There's a distinction, isn't there? Yeah, yeah. Other thoughts on that, Tracy? Yeah, do come in.
I'm absolutely loving this conversation. And I think this just really highlights where the coaching profession is right now, and actually puts a lot of responsibility on coach training providers, because I think any good one will cover things like how to deal with emotions and well-being issues when they are brought up in a coaching conversation, and about the distinction, that barrier that Rajesh mentioned, the distinction between coaching and counselling or therapy. And I suppose that the danger is that when people are coaching without any rigorous training, that's potentially where the real damage could come from, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, you know, obviously we've got a lovely variety of people here on our call today from different places. I don't know what the current situation is like in India, but in the UK, for example, quite a few coaches are now choosing to do something that's called mental health first aid. I guess, you know, you may have something similar, which is not, it's not a requirement, but I found a lot of coaches are finding it really useful, not so that they can start to deal with mental health issues, because there is a boundary we're navigating, isn't there? But so that they feel more comfortable to know when to refer and how to refer, and what are some of those warning signs that help us to navigate that sensitive boundary. In case any of you are not aware, the ICF has produced some useful resources around this. There's a white paper available in the research portal that highlights how to navigate referring a client to therapy. And also, one of the things I recall from conversations with the ICF is that there is a recognition that there is some blurring, you know, between these boundaries. Personally, I'm very fascinated with this because I have a particular interest in mental health, and I call it the grey space, because it's not binary, is it? It's not either coaching or therapy. Some cases are very, very clear that they are an immediate need for a referral, and others are grey. They're not clear. And so some of these resources are very useful, I think. And personally, I'll own it as my own perspective. I believe truly that coaching could play an enormously powerful role in helping people's mental health to not drop too far. The problem is that often people's their well-being drops to such a point that then the therapeutic option is the only way to go. But what if we were able to intervene and support people before it got to that critical point, so that we could keep them, you know, up at a more resourceful place? I think that coaching could be an enormously preventative, you know, a proactive preventative intervention. That's just my perspective on it. So yeah, let's hear some more. So Swasti, do come back in.
Yeah, I just wanted to, you know, comment on this when we are really talking about creating that very firm boundary around this. I've had a different experience. It could be just one of experiences where there was this client who's been in therapy and has, you know, gone through the entire spectrum of mental health, and was approached by her mother to take on. I had my own reservations, had a few other people, but getting together with the entire cohort of people that she was already working with and incorporating coaching brought about a shift in her that wasn't seen for 4 years for that 15-year-old. So bringing in coaching at a point, if you feel, if something within you is telling you that you would be able to help, chances are that we might be playing a very crucial role in that particular person's life, even as a coach.
What a lovely thought. And that's what this is all about, isn't it? At the end of the day, if we go back to the ICF's vision, which is that coaching is an integral part of a thriving society. That's what we're trying to do here, isn't it? We're ultimately trying to support people to thrive and feel better and do better and be better in some way through the wonderful conversations that you have with them. It's drip by drip, drip by drip into the ripple. And you're making me think of another boundary here, just to throw into the mix. I'd love to hear your views on this. Is we know from the statistics and the demographics that coaching has typically been available to certain kinds of people. The older paradigm was that it was mostly available for older, senior, male, organizational clients, that you had to have reached a certain status or have a certain amount of money to have coaching. And I'm raising this because another area that I'm deeply interested in is working in a coaching context with younger people. And so I'm working at the moment personally to really explore how to offer coaching and coaching skills to 18 to 25-year-olds. So there's an age boundary, isn't there, that we're navigating as well. We're challenging the traditional paradigms. So what are any of your thoughts about things like that? Are you noticing changes in the age boundaries of your clients or any other boundaries in the demographics? I can see, Swasti, you're nodding there. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
So it's been very recent, and after a lot of resistance from my own side, or letting go of the resistance from my own side, just starting to explore this new emerging field for myself. And I feel that a different kind of skill set is required to navigate this younger generation, since I just tied up with a university in UK to be providing some coaching services to them. And it's and I'm noticing that there is not a major difference between what I thought that I could provide as an executive or a mindfulness coach. I could use the same skills to kind of partner with these youngsters, that the impact is so much more stronger and hopefully long-lived, impacting the society in the long run, rather than just addressing those corporate leaders at this point in time. I'm still walking that path really cautiously, and really being cautious of not calling it my niche, and yet I'm willing to explore that more, and I'm kind of really enjoying the journey.
That's great, Swasti. Thank you. And Sarah, please, you've got your hand up. Do come in.
Hi. It's really interesting actually that the last 3 inquiries I've had have been from 2 females and a male, and all of them under the age of 33, and not senior management. Well, actually one is a senior management, but 2 aren't. And they're sort of self-funding. Actually, they're going to expense it through the company. But I was quite shocked, because I'm very clearly sort of positioning myself up with senior leaders, and having worked in my story, technology, and I found that really interesting. So I definitely had to reflect a lot on that. but it's brilliant. You know, that number one, I think they're understanding what coaching is and really trying to help themselves move forward at such a young age. I was just like, oh wow, it's just absolutely amazing. I wish I'd had that opportunity, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, it's wonderful, isn't it, when we one of the things that I've never understood is, why is it that someone needs to reach the age of 40 plus before they get any kind of leadership development opportunities in organizations when they probably needed it 20 years earlier? You know, why not give people these opportunities? Because we know from our demographics just how many young people are going to be in the workplace, and they are the leaders of our future, aren't they? And how could we equip them today rather than in 10 years time with the skills that they need? So yeah, I mean, gosh, I could talk for hours about that. I'm hugely excited about that. Neha, let's hear back from you again. What would you like to bring in?
What you shared just now, Tracy, and what is being discussed as to, you know, coaching moving towards the younger population. I think we've never had a doubt about the utility of coaching, irrespective of age or seniority or the position. I think the boundaries that are currently being tested are around affordability on the client side, lucrativeness on the coach's side, and the issue of scale. So there are boundaries of scale. There are boundaries around economics. I think those are being tested currently. Age or seniority is not the bottleneck.
Oh, I love your thinking. And in fact, I was just having a conversation with a group of coaches yesterday who were questioning and asking themselves, you know, what will happen to my income if I have to start charging a lot less money in order to make the coaching accessible? So there are, as Neha's bringing in here, some really interesting, I guess, boundaries and perhaps expectations that people have, isn't it? What are our expectations for income? What are the client's expectations around affordability? What are the boundaries? And can that come together in a way that's workable? And what are the expectations within the coaching profession of who can access that service and how they access that service? Very fascinating. Any other thoughts on that? What are you noticing yourselves in your regions around boundaries, around pricing structures, around affordability, accessibility? Any other thoughts around that? Thank you, Sarah. Are you noticing changes in financial boundaries around coaching? One of the things, sorry, go ahead, Neha. Go ahead.
It is the cool thing. No organization's development plan or vision is complete without introducing coaching to it, which opens up opportunities for us, which may also dilute the quality of coaching. I think we need to be cognizant of both.
Yeah, I guess that's always one of the challenges, isn't it? When something gets scaled and becomes more systemic rather than isolated, becomes more democratized, which coaching is starting to move into that direction. Many boundaries around quality versus quantity, pricing, accessibility start to get challenged, don't they, and changed. And I know, at least I'm noticing that in the UK and in EMEA, that some of those scaling challenges and also quality challenges. One of the things that I notice is when you have very large scale coaching initiatives and you have coaches that are literally coaching back to back into leadership programs or organizational initiatives. And in my work as a coaching supervisor, people will often be bringing in a sense of the challenges to their own well-being and their own work-life balance. So there's another balancing, a boundary area that we have to think about, isn't it? How are we navigating? How do we navigate the boundary between how much coaching we do, for how long, versus the other things that we are also spinning or juggling in our lives? I don't know about any of you, it'd be interesting to hear, but I personally don't only coach. Yeah, I have, like many people, a portfolio career. So I coach, I teach, I mentor, I supervise, I train, I assess. So I'm navigating boundaries all the time around how much of my time can I spend on each of those things and still be fit for practice. Any thoughts on that, especially with some of the changes that we're noticing in the world? What are your thoughts on how you navigate that, or any changes that you're seeing?
So in my experience, a lot has to do with the, these bigger coaching initiatives or coaching platforms that have come into picture, a kind of a shift from a lot of individual coaches moving on to those platforms and getting burnt out very quickly, because what they are offered in terms of remuneration is much lower than what they would, coach individually for, and yet there is ease of getting clients there.
Mm-hmm.
So you're coaching longer hours, you're working more. So that's one shift. And the other shift is a lot of coaches moving into organizational coaching or wanting to get into executive coaching, despite it not being, and struggling to find jobs because the profile doesn't suit a corporate coach's profile.
Mm-hmm.
So these two movements, which were almost like, at least I wasn't aware of that movement happening before the pandemic struck. And more so, it's more like a hurry to do that now. Since coaching has evolved immensely in the last 4 years.
Absolutely. So there is something here, isn't there, about whilst the growth of coaching and the democratization of coaching has many benefits, we also have to be careful on how might that compromise the quality because of the volume being done. How might that compromise the quality? And also, what does that mean for our own well-being as practitioners in terms of juggling and managing those boundaries between the other roles that we play and our own personal lives, our own personal needs and expectations? There's an interesting trend that I heard about recently through some colleagues linked to the ICF, which was around how there is a growing trend of burnout in coaches. So for perhaps some of these reasons that we're talking about, and isn't it interesting how it's quite often the professions that are meant to be focused on well-being and potential are the ones where people get burnt out. I'm sure we see this as well in the therapeutic environment, therapeutic population, doctors, nurses, very, very high incidence of burnout. So there are some boundaries there that perhaps are not being navigated as well as they could be. I'm wondering, oh, Sananda, are you going to say something? Because I just saw you come back on there before I jump in.
Yes, yeah. Actually, speaking of burnout, I had a very strange kind of burnout, which was from the couple of COVID years. Is this onslaught of information? There were at least 2 or 3 webinars happening a day across the world, and there was so much of information overload that I reached a stage where I could not handle it anymore, and I'm still kind of pacing myself because everything looks interesting, everything looks something that I need to absorb and learn from, but there is too much of that happening, and I don't know if everybody else experienced that. So I actually set boundaries to my learning, because I'm still kind of recovering from this mental exhaustion of information overload, and I was getting to a stage where I was feeling that, and that's still not past, is that I don't know anything. There's just so much happening in the field of neuroscience, in the field of psychology. It's just like it's all here, and I'm like, I can't breathe anymore. So I don't know if anybody else experienced this, or it's just me.
Well, from some of the smiles and nods I could see on the screen, Sananda, I don't think it's just you. So yeah, there is a boundary, isn't there? There's a limit on how much we can absorb. And that certainly resonates with me, Sananda, around what you were saying. How can I actually engage with all of this and take all of this on? I'm hearing people say similar things around the news as well. Some people are saying, I was in a class just recently where someone was saying, I just can't listen to the news anymore because it's just too much and it's too overwhelming. So we have to kind of put a boundary in to protect ourselves. So we're going back to our own needs again, aren't we? Our own well-being, to make sure that we can to not be overwhelmed. Suda's put a comment in here as well. I can resonate with that, Sunanda, the balance between curiosity to learn and FOMO, and overwhelm of the knowledge. Well, the FOMO definitely resonates with me, because I think if I'm really honest, I have a sense of FOMO. I like to know what's going on. I like to learn lots of different things, and absolutely, it can just get a little bit too much, can't it? Yeah. Thank you, Tim, for popping some more things in here. That Svasti is saying she really resonates, that the shift from self to community. Yeah, thank you. And that reminds me of something that I've been reading about just recently around levels of human consciousness and our transition from focus on self to others to system and community. And I guess that's a whole nother webinar on the boundaries associated with that too. So I'm conscious we've got about 5 minutes left. I decided a while ago to completely abandon my slides. I will send them to you afterwards, but I was just so intrigued and wanted to just engage with this conversation instead, because that's what's most important really, is connecting with you and hearing your thoughts. As we maybe start to come to a pause, I'd love to hear any final thoughts on perhaps other boundaries, or even what's coming out of our conversation today for you. What will you take out of this that will be useful for you in terms of reflecting on your boundaries and how you want to navigate them? In the last few minutes that we have, it would be lovely to hear any of your thoughts if you're prepared to share.
For me, it's about reminding myself of why I'm doing what I'm doing. Yeah, my greater why.
Your why. Yeah. Simon Sinek would love hearing you say that, Swasti, seeing as he says start with why. So always a really wonderful place to start, isn't it? Why am I doing this? Thank you. Any other thoughts? What are you taking out of this that you want to think a little bit more about, perhaps?
If I may, I think this is Sunanda, and I think one of the things that really struck a chord with me was what Neha said, is the fact that, you know, boundaries are important, and especially in the kind of work that we do. Yet at the same time, boundaries shouldn't helm you, shouldn't, you know, stop you from expanding. Yeah. So, and as I reflect on that, I also realize that specifically in the area of DEIB, I have learned so much over the past year or so. And working with clients, I think there's been an expansion as far as my own growth is concerned.
Wonderful. Yes, and if our learning boundaries were never to expand, we would be very limited, wouldn't we? So, you know, back to your point and what Neha was saying earlier, these all boundaries need to be tested, don't they, and challenged and encouraged to stretch and grow. I've got an image in my mind of a balloon, actually, that's a boundary that contains some air, but it can be inflated and deflated. So in some ways, really challenging these boundaries is helpful to us. That's how we grow. Anything else before I maybe hand back to Jaya to bring us to a pause?
All right, the silence says it all. So, well, just to conclude this, what was occurring for me was when we were burning out as coaches, how much did we flex our boundaries to take support from our own community? How many times did we reach out to accept humbly that I am going through this? And I've been there. I don't think I have sought help, because I think somewhere becoming a coach, you start taking all the responsibility on yourself to say, hey, don't trouble others, but you don't realize you have a community to fall back on, or you have some people to fall back on. And that's what I'm taking away from this conversation, that yeah, while we are helping everybody, how are we not really taking out time, but really mustering the courage to say, I am weak at this moment. So that's how I would conclude this. A lot of reflections on different aspects, not only the professional aspects, but the diversity inclusion aspect as well. I posted some links on the chat, and thank you, Tim, for sharing so many resources with us and sharing your thoughts, and everybody else. In case you would like to have such kind of topics, we would be very happy to hear from you. Let us know your feedback so that we can invite experts like Tracy to come and share their wisdom and actually trigger the conversation for all of us. So once again, thank you, Tracy, for your time. Really grateful for this.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you all. It's been really, really nice to spend this time with you. What great conversations to have. So thank you. And thank you for the work that you're doing. You're making such a contribution to the world, and the world needs it. So keep coaching. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.